Miriam, after careful consideration of our strategic goals, we've decided to move in a new direction with the infrastructure architecture division. Julian Croft's voice was flat, devoid of warmth, coming through my laptop speakers with unnerving clarity. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Consequently, your position as senior infrastructure architect has been eliminated, effective immediately. His face on the video call remained impassive, framed by the sharp lines of his expensive suit jacket. The tech industry demands constant innovation and, frankly, Miriam, your established methods, while once valuable, are hindering our necessary transformation. HR, specifically Claire Dubois, will contact you on Monday regarding the final paperwork and severance details. Before I could even formulate a question, let alone process the words, the video call ended abruptly, leaving only my own stunned reflection on the dark screen. I stared at the blank screen for a long moment, maybe two, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in my otherwise silent kitchen. My half-eaten bowl of oatmeal sat beside the laptop, suddenly unappetizing. 20 years. 20 years poured into Apex Solutions. Countless late nights wrestling with server migrations, missed family dinners celebrating Leo's small victories, weekend emergencies troubleshooting systems that kept the company running. All of it dismissed in a sterile, 60-second video call by a CEO barely old enough to remember the company's founding. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a tremor running through them. What could I possibly say? Rage simmered beneath the shock, a cold fury mixing with a creeping sense of betrayal. Yet, decades of ingrained professionalism took over, a shield forged through countless corporate battles. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then, an email notification popped up. From Julian. The subject line, confidential asset return and separation procedures. Miriam, it began, equally devoid of courtesy. Please ensure all company materials, including your security badges, laptop, mobile devices, and any physical or digital documentation related to the Odyssey project, are returned to building security by close of business, Tuesday. Claire Dubois from HR will provide further instructions on Monday. The transition team, led by Nathan Reed, will assume control of your accounts and responsibilities immediately. My name is Miriam Thorne. I am 59 years old. And until approximately 3 minutes ago, I was the senior infrastructure architect at Apex Solutions in Cedar Ridge, a company I helped build. I'm a single mother. I put my son, Leo, through college and now support him through his PhD program working for this very company, navigating the tightrope of budgets and deadlines. I've weathered 4 different CEOs before Julian, survived 6 office relocations across the state, and steered the technical side through 2 complete, ground-up overhauls of our core product line. What I want, what I believe I've earned, is simple: dignity, respect, acknowledgement for 2 decades of unwavering service, of solving problems others couldn't even define. Standing squarely in the way of that simple desire is Julian Croft, the 36-year-old CEO who inherited the position when his father, the respected founder Walter Finch, retired last year. Julian, armed with his prestigious Eastern Business School MBA and a brief, flashy stint at a major consulting firm, arrived like a Silicon Valley whirlwind, determined to obliterate anything he deemed legacy. Apparently, legacy now included loyal employees with decades of irreplaceable knowledge, discarded via impersonal video calls and curt emails. Setting my laptop aside on the worn kitchen counter, I walked to the window. The early morning mist hung heavy over the quiet suburban street in Cedar Ridge, blurring the familiar shapes of neighboring houses. My own modest home, the one I'd painstakingly made payments on for years, with 15 more still stretching ahead, suddenly felt precarious. Less like a sanctuary and more like a fragile anchor in a gathering storm. At 59, I was abruptly unemployed in an industry obsessed with youth, novelty, and buzzwords Julian loved to throw around. Leo had just started his demanding PhD program at the State University, counting on my help to cover his rent and basic living expenses. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders, amplifying the injustice burning in my chest. It wasn't just about me, it was about him too. The Odyssey project. My mind snagged on the name mentioned in Julian's email. Apex Solutions' flagship integrated data system. The complex, sprawling beast that generated nearly 60% of the company's annual revenue. The system I had architected, not officially. Perhaps the credit often went to teams led by men with louder voices and sharper elbows, but functionally, I had built its core logic from the ground up, stitched together disparate legacy components with custom code. Elegant workarounds documented meticulously only in my own private notes because formal documentation was never prioritized, never budgeted for. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. The transition team. As if the intricate web of dependencies, the undocumented failsafes, the institutional memory embedded in my very neurons, could be neatly summarized in a few handover documents and funneled through Slack channels to Nathan Reed and his crew. What Julian Croft, in his arrogant rush to modernize, failed utterly to comprehend was that I wasn't just some outdated cog in his shiny new machine. I was the silent architect who had designed the engine while the official development teams polished the chrome. I was the living institutional memory, the human Rosetta Stone connecting arcane legacy systems to the newer platforms they barely understood. I was the translator ensuring data flowed correctly between worlds built decades apart. And I was, quite literally, the only person on this planet who possessed the precise, undocumented sequence of interventions required to prevent the Odyssey project's core data integration module from catastrophic failure during the annual system-wide security certificate update, an update scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from today. I joined Apex Solutions back in 2001, when it was still finding its feet, operating out of a drafty, converted warehouse on the industrial side of Cedar Ridge. It wasn't even called Apex then. Mr. Finch, Walter Finch, Julian's father, hired me himself. He took a chance on me, a former administrative assistant at a law firm with a regional university degree in mathematics, not computer science. I'd taught myself programming in my spare time, building custom databases to track complex legal cases because the small firm couldn't afford off-the-shelf software. My background was unconventional, practical, driven by necessity rather than theory. You've got something far more valuable than a specific degree, Miriam, Mr. Finch had told me during that pivotal interview, his gaze sharp but kind. You have sharp intuition honed by real-world problem solving. You don't just understand systems, you understand how to make them work for people. Under Mr. Finch's thoughtful leadership, I didn't just work, I thrived. As the company grew from a scrappy startup into a respected industry player, Apex Solutions, so did my responsibilities and my expertise. I progressed from basic database maintenance to complex systems integration, eventually becoming the de facto architect for the company's most critical infrastructure. When the ambitious Odyssey project was conceived, a revolutionary integrated data system that became our flagship product, I was integral to the core team. Even if my title never fully reflected my contribution, my work was largely behind the scenes, bridging gaps, fixing flaws, ensuring the complex pieces held together. My colleagues, especially the veteran engineers who remembered the early, challenging days, respected my knowledge. Developers, even senior ones, would quietly appear at my desk when they hit intractable roadblocks, seeking help troubleshooting cryptic code or brainstorming elegant workarounds for system limitations. Ask Miriam became the unofficial mantra whispered in hallways whenever someone encountered a system quirk, an anomaly that defied the official manuals and stumped the designated experts. Meanwhile, at home, life presented its own challenges. I was raising Leo alone after his father left when he was just 4 years old. The flexibility Mr. Finch fostered at Apex was invaluable, a lifeline. When Leo had school events I couldn't miss, or when childhood illnesses kept him home, I could work remotely, patching into the systems from my kitchen table, making up the hours late at night or on quiet weekends. The company became more than just a workplace. It felt like a second family, a source of stability in a sometimes chaotic single-parent existence. I repaid that perceived loyalty with unwavering dedication, pouring my energy into ensuring our systems were robust and reliable. Everything shifted the day Mr. Finch announced his retirement. Julian returned, not from the trenches of tech development, but from the polished halls of Eastern Business School and a brief, high-level consulting gig. He swept in, trailing a cadre of young, slick consultants armed with glossy presentations preaching digital transformation, agile disruption, and synergistic paradigms. I genuinely tried to embrace the new direction, the endless buzzwords. I attended the mandatory workshops, diligently learned the new project management frameworks Julian imposed, and adjusted my workflow to fit the rigid new templates, even when they felt inefficient or counterintuitive. But Julian's attitude towards the veteran employees, those of us who carried the company's history and deep system knowledge, was dismissive at best, openly condescending at worst. In crucial planning meetings I had once led discussions in, he would cut me off mid-sentence, often turning pointedly to redirect my complex technical questions to one of his newly hired, bright-eyed VPs. Even when it was painfully obvious they lacked the context or the answers. "We need to aggressively shed the legacy thinking holding us back," he declared during one particularly uncomfortable all-hands meeting, his gaze sweeping meaningfully over the faces of those of us who had been with Apex since the warehouse days. The implication was clear: we were the legacy. Still, I persisted. This company, under Mr. Finch, had supported me through some of the toughest times in my personal life. I cared deeply about our products, our clients, and the colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. When Julian mandated a new, off-the-shelf project management system that fundamentally failed to integrate with our existing core databases, a critical flaw I had pointed out in multiple memos, I quietly spent my own weekends building custom scripts to bridge the gap. It was unrecognized, uncompensated work, but it kept critical operations running smoothly, preventing the chaos I knew would otherwise ensue. There were warning signs, red flags I consciously chose to downplay or ignore. My sudden exclusion from strategic planning meetings I had previously been essential to, the gradual reassignment of engineers I had mentored, placing them under newly appointed managers who barely understood our core systems, my unceremonious relocation from an office near the main development hub to a smaller, isolated space tucked away in a forgotten corner of the building. I rationalized these slights as typical reorganization pains, the inevitable friction of change, rather than recognizing them as part of a systematic effort to marginalize my role, to diminish my influence before discarding me entirely. I clung to the belief, perhaps naively, that my deep institutional knowledge, my proven track record of solving the unsolvable problems, would ultimately be recognized as indispensable, as valuable. As it turned out, I was both profoundly right and catastrophically wrong. The Monday morning after Julian's curt video call felt surreal. I drove to the familiar Apex Solutions headquarters building, the glass and steel structure suddenly feeling alien and imposing. Sal Moretti, the kindly security officer who had greeted me by name with a warm smile every single morning for the past 15 years, stood at the entrance. Today, his usual smile was replaced by a look of profound discomfort. Instead of waving me through with the usual nod, he held up a hand, stopping me at the turnstile. He fumbled beneath his desk, retrieving a temporary visitor badge. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thorne," Sal murmured, his voice low, avoiding my eyes as he clipped the flimsy plastic badge to my jacket. They deactivated your employee credentials overnight." The small humiliation stung more than I expected. Stripped of my identity before I even walked through the door. "I understand, Sal," I managed, keeping my voice even, though my insides churned. "It's certainly not your fault." Inside, the expansive lobby felt cold, impersonal. I headed straight for the HR department on the 3rd floor. Claire Dubois, the human resources manager, ushered me into her office, maintaining a careful, professional distance. She gestured towards a chair but didn't quite meet my gaze as she slid a thick folder of termination paperwork across her polished desk. "We've prepared your severance package, Miriam," Claire said, her voice professionally detached, reciting the standard script. "It includes 2 months' salary, continuation of health benefits through the end of the quarter, and information regarding your 401k rollover options." Her voice droned on, outlining the meager compensation for 2 decades of my life. "Is Julian in the office today?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Claire hesitated, her carefully neutral expression flickering for just a moment. She glanced instinctively towards the closed door of her office. "Mr. Croft is scheduled in back-to-back meetings all morning," she replied, the excuse sounding thin even to her own ears. "Convenient," I murmured, picking up the pen and signing where indicated on the documents. the scratch of the nib unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. 20 years of dedication, and he couldn't even face me in person for 5 minutes. As I signed the final page, Claire leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Miriam," she began, a hint of genuine sympathy softening her features as she glanced again towards the door. "For what it's worth, this wasn't my decision. Or Nathan's, really. Several of us, we tried to advocate for a different approach, but..." Her voice trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Julian's decree was final. "It's fine, Claire," I cut her off gently, not wanting her pity, needing to maintain my composure. "Business is business, as they say." Escorted by a stony-faced security contractor I'd never seen before, another small, calculated indignity, I returned to my recently assigned cramped office. The few items that made this sterile space mine fit easily into a single cardboard box. A framed photo of Leo grinning proudly at his high school graduation, a slightly wilted potted plant I'd nurtured for years. A handful of reference books, a favorite coffee mug. As I carefully wrapped the photo in protective paper, I noticed Nathan Reed, the new chief technology officer Julian had brought in 6 months prior, hovering awkwardly near my open doorway. He clutched a tablet, his brow furrowed with an anxiety that seemed out of place. "Miriam," Nathan said, stepping hesitantly into the room. His usual air of brisk efficiency was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. "Before you leave, could we possibly verify a few technical details regarding the Odyssey project's cloud integration protocols?" I slowly straightened up, placing the wrapped photo carefully into the box, and raised a single eyebrow. The audacity was breathtaking. "Now you want my input, Nathan?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "After I've been told my methods are hindering transformation?" Nathan attempted a smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "It's just standard documentation completion, Miriam," he stammered, shifting his weight, ensuring a smooth transition. "The development team is prepping for the annual security certificate update next week, and there seem to be, well, some unexpected gaps in the knowledge transfer regarding the data linkage." "Gaps?" I repeated, the word hanging in the air. I picked up the coffee mug, turning it slowly in my hands. "Funny how those undocumented gaps suddenly appear when you summarily fire the person who spent 2 decades building and maintaining the very system you're now struggling with." "You didn't build Odyssey," Nathan said quickly, a touch of his old dismissiveness returning, likely echoing Julian's narrative. "You were primarily involved in the maintenance team for the legacy components. The casual, deliberate erasure of my contribution, the countless nights spent untangling problems that the official developers couldn't solve. The elegant, undocumented workarounds that kept Odyssey stable and functional through 3 major architectural upheavals. The core logic I designed it ignited something cold and hard deep within my chest. A quiet, burning anger. Check the primary code repository logs for the core integration modules, Nathan," I suggested mildly, my voice deceptively calm. "My commit history might be illuminating. You'll find my digital fingerprints on well over 60% of the custom integration code that actually makes Odyssey function. But I'm sure your highly paid transition team, with all their fresh perspectives, will figure it out eventually. Isn't that what they're getting paid the big bucks for?" Nathan's forced smile completely vanished. His knuckles were white where he gripped the tablet. "Just a few specific questions, Miriam, please," he pressed, his voice tight with poorly concealed panic. "Where exactly are the override protocols documented for when the primary authentication server rejects the annual security certificate updates during the handshake with the federated databases?" I knew exactly what he was asking about. He wasn't just asking about protocols, he was asking about the critical flaw, the Achilles heel I discovered years ago in Odyssey's original design, a flaw the official documentation conveniently never acknowledged because admitting it would have been embarrassing for the original architects. Every single year, without fail, when the global security certificates updated across the network, the Odyssey system would violently reject the new protocols, threatening to sever connections to all client databases, unless a specific, highly counterintuitive series of manual interventions were performed in a precise, unalterable sequence. I had stumbled upon the workaround during the very first system-wide update crisis, long before Nathan or even Julian arrived, and I had personally meticulously handled the delicate update process every single year since, documenting the steps only in my private, encrypted files. It's all in the official system documentation, Nathan, I lied smoothly, meeting his anxious gaze without flinching. Standard operating procedures. We've scoured the documentation, Miriam, Nathan insisted, sweat beading on his upper lip. Hours and hours. There's absolutely nothing in there about this specific failure sequence or any manual overrides. Then I suppose, I replied, carefully taping my cardboard box shut, the screech of the tape gun echoing in the small room. Your transition team will just have to earn those fresh perspectives the hard way. I picked up the box. After all, my methods are replaceable and outdated, remember? Walking through the sprawling Apex Solutions office for the very last time felt like navigating a minefield of averted gazes and sudden, intense interest in computer screens. Colleagues I had worked with for years, people I'd shared lunches and project deadlines with, now avoided meeting my eyes, their discomfort palpable. The weight of the cardboard box in my arms felt symbolic, holding the meager remnants of a 20-year career. But a heavier weight settled over me, the stark reality of what had just happened. And the dawning realization of what was almost certainly about to happen to Apex Solutions. 20 years of loyalty, countless critical contributions deliberately minimized or entirely unrecognized in official channels. And a vast repository of vital, undocumented knowledge existing only inside my head. Julian Croft, in his hubris, had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought he was simply discarding an obsolete component, a relic of the past hindering his grand vision. In reality, he had just severed the primary neural pathway, the operational brainstem. That kept his company's single most profitable product, the Odyssey project, alive and functioning. The full implications were still sinking in, swirling with a potent mix of anger, hurt, and a startling, nascent sense of power. I wasn't ready to act on this realization, not yet. The professional ethics ingrained over decades were hard to shake, even now. But as I loaded my single, pathetic box of belongings into the trunk of my aging sedan in the gray Cedar Ridge afternoon, I understood with chilling, perfect clarity. I now held the power to either discreetly save Apex Solutions from the brink of disaster or to simply step back and watch it implode from a safe distance. The choice, terrifyingly, profoundly, was entirely mine. Almost a week passed. A week spent navigating the frustrating bureaucracy of unemployment claims, polishing my resume until it shone, and fielding worried calls from my son, Leo, about finances. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea and staring blankly at a job board filled with position-seeking digital natives and cloud ninjas, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed the main number for Apex Solutions. My heart gave an involuntary lurch. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Hello, Miriam? Oh, thank God you answered. The voice on the other end was tight with panic, instantly recognizable. Daniel Chen, a bright lead engineer I'd mentored for years, one of the few younger developers who genuinely respected the legacy knowledge. Daniel? Is everything all right? I asked, feigning mild surprise. No. Not all right. Miriam, I probably shouldn't be calling you, protocol and all, but we're facing a complete meltdown. His words tumbled out in a rush, laced with stress. It's Odyssey. The data linkage between the core system and the client databases, it's completely failing in the final staging environment. We were running pre-update diagnostics for next week's certificate rollover, and everything just stopped. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch, picturing the controlled chaos likely erupting back at Apex. I'm sorry to hear that, Daniel, I replied calmly. That does sound problematic. Problematic? Miriam, it's a disaster, he practically shouted. The system's rejecting all test protocols for data synchronization. Error codes none of us have ever seen before. Nobody can figure out why. Nathan's had the entire team reviewing integration logs and cloud configurations for 2 days straight, pulling all-nighters. But there's absolutely nothing in the official documentation, nothing in the knowledge base, about this specific error pattern. The raw desperation in his voice was unmistakable, tinged with fear. He knew what was at stake. That sounds incredibly frustrating, I said again, my voice still maddeningly calm. It felt good, this small measure of control. Miriam, please, Daniel begged, his voice dropping to a strained whisper. You have to help us. The full security update is scheduled to go live across all client systems in less than a week. If we can't resolve this data linkage failure before then, when the new security certificates are pushed, our clients' systems won't be able to authenticate or synchronize with Odyssey. We're talking major financial institutions, government contractors. Their operations would grind to a halt. It would be catastrophic. Reputational ruin, lawsuits, everything. I closed my eyes briefly, visualizing the scene, frantic developers huddled around monitors, Nathan Reed pacing, barking orders into his phone. Julian Croft demanding immediate solutions, his polished facade likely cracking under the pressure. A significant, vengeful part of me wanted to savor their predicament. To let them drown in the consequences of their arrogant decision to cast me aside like obsolete hardware. Let them crash and burn. It's what they deserved. Daniel, I reminded him gently, but firmly, I no longer work for Apex Solutions. Julian made it quite clear that my position was eliminated, that my methods were outdated and replaceable. He was wrong, Miriam. Dead wrong. Daniel said bluntly, the words echoing my own thoughts. Everyone here knows that. Everyone knew Odyssey relied on you, even if management pretended otherwise. He paused, then added, his voice resonating with sincerity, this isn't just about Julian or even Apex anymore, Miriam. It's about the clients who depend on our systems. Real businesses, real people relying on Odyssey's data integrity for their critical operations. His appeal to my professional conscience, to the sense of responsibility ingrained over 20 years, hit its mark. Damn him. Despite the bitterness, despite the deep, personal wound, I couldn't just stand by and allow catastrophic failure to impact innocent clients. My pride, my ethics, wouldn't let me. Check the configuration file for the primary data synchronization module, I relented, giving him a crucial breadcrumb, but not the whole loaf. Around line 1457, if memory serves. There's a legacy data verification protocol flag that often needs to be temporarily toggled to a false before initiating certificate updates. Especially in cloud environments. It prevents asynchronous lock conflicts. I heard the rapid clatter of Daniel's keyboard through the phone. A moment of silence, then an astonished murmur. That flag, it's completely undocumented, he breathed. Why on earth would that? Never mind, I see the logic now. It makes perfect sense with the new cloud architecture. A huge sigh of relief whistled through the line. Miriam, you are an absolute lifesaver. Thank you, thank you. Good luck with the rest of the diagnostics, Daniel, I said coolly, and ended the call before he could ask for more. One small fire tamped down, but I knew the larger blaze was still building. Over the next few days, my phone became a reluctant hotline. Calls and increasingly desperate emails trickled in, not just from Daniel, but from other stressed engineers and even mid-level managers at Apex. Each encountering unexpected, undocumented roadblocks as they scrambled to prepare for the looming Odyssey update. I provided minimal, carefully rationed guidance, just enough cryptic advice to keep them stumbling forward. To prevent immediate total system collapse. But never enough to fully resolve the underlying complexities or hand them the complete solution on a silver platter. Each interaction served as grim confirmation of what I had long known but management had refused to acknowledge, the Odyssey system. The supposed jewel in Apex's crown was a dangerously fragile tapestry woven from official protocols and my own intricate, undocumented custom fixes and workarounds. A system only I truly understood in its entirety. And then, late Wednesday afternoon, the call I had been both expecting and dreading finally came. The caller ID showed Julian Croft's direct line. I let it ring 4 times, composing myself, then answered with the same practiced neutrality. Hello, Miriam? It's Julian Croft. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual smooth, confident arrogance. The barely concealed panic I'd heard in Daniel's voice was now present in the CEO's as well, though tightly controlled. "Hello, Julian," I replied, keeping my tone level, professional, almost pleasant. "How can I help you?" Apex is experiencing some significant technical difficulties with the upcoming Odyssey update, he began, the admission clearly costing him. The team, Nathan Reed, suggested you might possess unique insights that could help expedite a resolution. Unique insights. A delicate way of saying the knowledge we threw away and are now desperate to get back. I see, I responded evenly. And what exactly seems to be the nature of the problem, Julian? Let him spell it out. Let him articulate the disaster he had created. There was a pause, filled only by the faint sound of his breathing. The entire data linkage and authentication system is rejecting the update protocols, he finally admitted, the words sounding forced. We've tried everything documented. Everything Nathan and his team can think of. Nothing is working. He took another breath, his voice tightening further. Miriam, the company's reputation, our client's operational security, millions in revenue, it's all at stake. I allowed myself a small, private smile, turning away from the window to look at the framed photo of Leo on my desk. That does indeed sound serious, Julian, I acknowledged, injecting just a hint of sympathy into my tone. Very serious. Miriam, we need you, he said, the words rushing out now, the desperation breaking through his control. We'd like to bring you in immediately as an external consultant to resolve this critical issue. Apex Solutions is prepared to offer a very generous daily rate for your specialized expertise. There it was. The desperate lifeline thrown by the man who had cut me adrift just days before. He needed me now. He needed the outdated knowledge he had so casually, so arrogantly dismissed. And he was willing to pay handsomely for it. The temptation to refuse outright, to simply say no, and hang up, letting him face the catastrophic failure he so richly deserved, was immense. It pulsed like a physical ache in my chest. But another, colder, more strategic thought surfaced. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and profitably. I might be available for consultation, Julian, I said instead, my voice measured, betraying none of the internal turmoil. I named a figure, double what I thought reasonable, triple my old daily rate. My standard consulting rate for emergency interventions of this nature is $5,000 per day. I added another condition, testing his desperation. With a minimum engagement commitment of 10 business days, payable in advance. Julian didn't even flinch. Not a hesitation. Not a counteroffer. Done, he said immediately, the relief in his voice palpable. Absolutely. Done. Can you start immediately? Remotely, of course. We'll get you full system access right away. Now, for the twist of the knife. I'm sorry, Julian, I said, injecting a note of polite regret into my voice. The lie came easily, smoothly. But I've actually just accepted a senior position with another company. Another company? Already? Julian sounded genuinely shocked, sputtering slightly. The thought that I might actually be valuable, employable elsewhere, seemed to have never crossed his mind. Who? Yes, I continued calmly. Summit Solutions. I'm scheduled to start orientation next Monday. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, heavy with implications. Summit Solutions. Not a direct competitor in the same niche as Apex, but a rapidly growing player in the adjacent, lucrative data analytics space. The optics would be devastating for Julian, having his recently fired, outdated architect, now employed by a respected firm like Summit. Swoop in to rescue Apex from a self-inflicted crisis would be utterly humiliating. It would be impossible to keep quiet. I see, Julian finally said, his voice flat, all the earlier relief gone, replaced by cold calculation. He understood the leverage I now held. Right. He cleared his throat. Miriam, what would it take? What would it take to secure your full, undivided attention until this Odyssey update is successfully completed and stable? He paused, then added the words I knew were coming. Name your price. The raw desperation in his voice, the complete reversal of power, should have felt overwhelmingly satisfying. a moment of pure vindication. Instead, it felt hollow, empty. It was stark confirmation that, to Julian Croft and likely to Apex Solutions under his leadership, I had only ever been a resource. A tool to be utilized when convenient, discarded when not. Never a respected colleague, never a valued contributor whose experience mattered. Just a line item, ultimately expendable. I'll need to think about it, Julian, I replied coolly, reclaiming control. Consider my existing commitments. I will review the situation and get back to you with my terms tomorrow morning. As I hung up the phone, the quiet hum of my home office felt charged with newfound electricity. Julian Croft had inadvertently handed me something far more valuable than a potential consulting fee. He had given me undeniable proof of my own power, my own leverage. I hadn't actively sabotaged anything. I hadn't planted any logic bombs or deleted critical files. I had simply walked away, taking with me the lifetime of knowledge they had never bothered to properly value, document, or understand. And that simple act, that quiet departure, had brought a multi-million-dollar company, led by an arrogant MBA, to its knees in less than 2 weeks. The question burning in my mind now was no longer if I held the power. The question was, what, exactly, was I going to do with it? Miriam, after careful consideration of our strategic goals, we've decided to move in a new direction with the infrastructure architecture division. The next morning, before contacting Julian with my terms, I did something impulsive. Instead of just using Summit Solutions as a fictional bargaining chip, I decided to explore the possibility for real. Their corporate website was sleek, professional, and listed several intriguing open positions. One, in particular, caught my eye, a senior systems integration consultant role. The description mirrored my Apex experience almost perfectly, but emphasized strategic vision and cross-platform expertise, the very skills Julian had dismissed. On a whim, fueled by a mixture of defiance and curiosity, I quickly tailored my resume. Drafted a compelling cover letter highlighting my uncredited work on Odyssey, and hit a submit. To my genuine surprise, my phone rang less than 3 hours later. It was Summit Solutions' HR department. They wanted to schedule a preliminary video interview for that same afternoon. By the end of the day, I had spoken not only with their HR director but also, impressively, with the vice president of their entire integration team. The connection was immediate, the tone refreshingly different from Apex. They didn't see my 20 years of experience as legacy or outdated, they saw it as depth, as invaluable institutional knowledge. They asked insightful questions, listened intently to my answers, and seemed genuinely excited by my practical, problem-solving approach. We'd like to bring you in for a formal, final round interview tomorrow morning, Miriam, the HR director concluded, her voice warm and enthusiastic. The VP and the entire senior team were very impressed with your background and your strategic thinking. As I hung up, feeling a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in days, my phone immediately buzzed again. Caller ID, Apex Solutions. This time, it was Nathan Reed. Miriam, the situation here is critical, he said, dispensing with any pleasantries. His voice was strained, bordering on frantic. We have less than 5 days until the Odyssey update goes live across the client base, and honestly, we are nowhere close to resolving these data linkage and authentication issues. Julian mentioned, he said you might be available to consult. I am considering it, Nathan, I replied coolly, letting the statement hang in the air. Though I must admit, I'm surprised your highly capable transition team is encountering such difficulties. My voice dripped with polite sarcasm. After all, I was explicitly told my methods were outdated and hindering progress. Nathan let out a heavy sigh, the sound crackling over the line. It was the sigh of a man caught between a rock and a hard place, Julian's demands and technical reality. Look, Miriam, we both know Julian handled your departure poorly, he conceded, his voice dropping. Inexcusably. But this is bigger than that now. Much bigger. He lowered his voice further, as if afraid of being overheard even through the phone. Our major clients, we're talking United Federal Bank, Sterling Financial Group, plus the Pentagon contract. If their core data systems fail authentication during this update, the consequences are unthinkable. Market chaos, massive penalties, potential security breaches. I understand the stakes perfectly, Nathan, I interjected calmly, cutting off his litany of potential disasters. My mind was working quickly now, formulating my demands. And that's precisely why my consultation fee is substantial and non-negotiable. Whatever Julian offered, whatever it is, we'll pay it, Nathan said quickly, desperation overriding any pretense of negotiation. Just tell us what you need. Anything. I paused, letting him sweat for a moment longer. Then, I laid out my terms, clearly and concisely. First, complete, unrestricted remote root access to the entire Odyssey development and staging environment. Immediately. Second, absolutely no supervision, no check-ins, no status update meetings. I work independently, on my own schedule. Third, and this is crucial, Nathan, I want it formalized in writing, reviewed and signed by Apex legal counsel and Julian himself. That any solutions, code modifications, or documentation I provide remain my exclusive intellectual property. Apex Solutions will be granted a limited, non-transferable license to use these solutions solely for the purpose of resolving this specific Odyssey update crisis. Nothing more. There was a sharp intake of breath on Nathan's end. Miriam, that's highly unorthodox, he stammered. Standard consulting agreements involve work for hire, IP transfer. And standard procedure usually doesn't involve firing your most critical system architect via 60-second video call days before the most sensitive annual update. Nathan, I interrupted, my voice hardening. Those are my terms. Non-negotiable. Take them or leave them. A tense silence followed. I could almost hear the frantic calculations running through Nathan's head. The technical impossibility of fixing Odyssey without me versus the professional humiliation and legal complexities of agreeing to my demands. All right, he finally said, his voice resigned. Agreed. I'll get legal drafting the agreement immediately. And I'll talk to Julian. Within the hour, a formal consultation agreement, precisely reflecting my stringent terms regarding access, autonomy, and intellectual property, landed in my inbox from Apex Solutions Senior Legal Counsel. Attached were the secure VPN credentials granting me unfettered remote access to the heart of the Odyssey system. I spent that entire evening logged into the Apex development environment, meticulously dissecting the tangled mess Julian's modernization efforts and Nathan's subsequent panicked fixes had made of my carefully constructed system. My initial assessment had been correct. The core data linkage and authentication modules were not just flawed, they were actively destabilized, damaged by clumsy, ill-informed interventions. Correcting the problems would require more than just applying my old workarounds, it would necessitate significant reconstruction of key system components. The timeline, already tight, suddenly felt impossibly compressed. The solution wasn't particularly complex for me, steeped as I was in Odyssey's history and quirks, but it required an intimate, almost intuitive understanding of the system's undocumented behaviors, knowledge that, as far as I knew, existed only in my head. The next day, Friday, I attended my final interview at Summit Solutions. It went even better than I could have possibly hoped. The interview wasn't an interrogation, it was a collaborative discussion. They were genuinely impressed by the depth and breadth of my experience, asking thoughtful, strategic questions about my approach to complex systems integration, managing legacy architecture transitions, and fostering knowledge sharing within technical teams. They valued the very things Julian Croft had dismissed. By the end of the 3-hour session, they extended a formal offer. A senior consultant position, a salary 30% higher than my peak earnings at Apex, comprehensive benefits, and, crucially, a flexible work arrangement that acknowledged my value beyond just hours spent chained to a desk. We desperately need someone with your depth of experience, Miriam, the hiring director explained earnestly as he walked me out. Someone who can see the invisible connections between disparate systems, the patterns that others miss. Someone who can bridge the old and the new. I accepted on the spot, my voice thick with emotion. We agreed on a start date 2 weeks out, giving me just enough time, I calculated, to resolve the Apex crisis without any conflict of interest. That evening, back home, As I meticulously mapped out the necessary code changes and prepared to begin the delicate surgical repairs on the Odyssey system, my personal cell phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but local. I hesitated, then answered. Miriam? It's Walter Finch. My breath caught. Mr. Finch. Julian's father. The man who had hired me, mentored me, the man whose vision had built Apex Solutions from the ground up. His voice, though older now, still carried the familiar weight of quiet authority and integrity. Mr. Finch, I said, genuinely surprised and touched by his call. It's good to hear your voice. I wish it were under better circumstances, he replied, his tone heavy with regret. I just heard the full story of what happened, Miriam. How Julian handled your departure. I want you to know, unequivocally, that this is not how I built this company. This is not the kind of leadership I taught him. Nor the values I instilled. I know that, Mr. Finch, I said softly. I always knew that. Julian tells me, he continued, a sigh roughening his voice, that they've had to bring you back as a highly paid consultant because absolutely no one else can figure out how to stabilize Odyssey for the update. It only confirmed what I, and many of the board members, always suspected, that your contributions, your true value to Apex, went far beyond what was ever formally recognized or acknowledged by my son. I remained silent, unsure how to respond to his candid admission. The board of directors is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, Miriam, Mr. Finch added, his voice lowering slightly, becoming more conspiratorial. Julian's leadership, his recent decisions, they are being seriously questioned. This looming Odyssey crisis, coupled with your abrupt departure and subsequent rehiring under these extreme terms, it has severely shaken their confidence. There are also whispers, strong rumors, that several other key senior engineers are polishing their resumes, planning to leave. This was entirely unexpected. I had anticipated causing significant problems for Julian, perhaps even forcing a public apology or some financial concession, but potentially triggering his removal as CEO, bringing down the son of the man I respected so deeply, that felt complicated. Excessive, perhaps, even given his callous treatment of me. What are you telling me, Mr. Finch? I asked carefully. I'm telling you, Miriam, he said, his voice deliberate and clear, that you hold more power in this situation right now than you probably realize. How you choose to handle this crisis, the information you possess, and what you might choose to share with the board. It could very well determine the future leadership, and perhaps even the future direction, of Apex Solutions. After we hung up, I sat motionless in the deepening twilight, the phone still warm in my hand, absorbing the staggering implications of Mr. Finch's words. What had begun as a deeply personal slight, a disrespectful and humiliating dismissal after 2 decades of loyal service, had unexpectedly snowballed into something with far greater, far more complex consequences. The choices I made in the next few days wouldn't just impact Julian Croft's career, they could fundamentally reshape the entire company, potentially triggering a crisis far exceeding the technical one I was hired to fix. The question was no longer simply could I bring Julian Croft down. The question, heavy and unwelcome, was should I? After a long, restless night spent weighing the tangled threads of loyalty, justice, revenge, and professional responsibility, I made my decision. I would not actively sabotage Apex Solutions, my own integrity wouldn't allow it. Nor, however, would I simply ride in like a white knight and rescue Julian completely, allowing him to potentially take credit for the fix later. Instead, I would meticulously fulfill the precise letter of our consulting agreement. I would provide exactly what they had contracted me for, a stable, functional Odyssey system ready for the update. Nothing less, but absolutely nothing more. No extra documentation beyond the necessary technical notes for the fix itself, no strategic recommendations for future improvements. No training sessions for Nathan's struggling team. I logged back into the Apex systems and began the intensive work of implementing the necessary fixes, carefully rebuilding the damaged authentication modules and stabilizing the data linkage protocols. As I worked, I documented each precise step, each line of corrected code, each configuration change with meticulous, irrefutable clarity, creating a digital trail that clearly showed the state of the system before my intervention and the specific actions I took to repair it. The fixes themselves, while intricate, were elegantly simple once you understood the system's deep-seated idiosyncrasies, the very legacy knowledge Julian had despised. I estimated, conservatively, that I could complete the entire repair and stabilization process in just under 3 days. Far less than the 10-day minimum engagement they had agreed, and already paid for. Midway through the first full day of intensive coding, my phone rang. Apex Solutions. Nathan Reed. Miriam? Just checking in, Nathan began, his voice noticeably less stressed than before. Likely having seen the positive progress in the staging environment logs. How's it going? Progress is steady, Nathan, I replied coolly, not pausing in my work. The core issues are more or less what I anticipated based on the system's history. Great. That's fantastic news, he said, relief evident in his tone. Listen, Miriam. Julian is asking for daily progress reports. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He wants you to join a brief leadership team video call at 4 p.m. today, just to provide a quick status update. I stopped typing, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A demand disguised as a request. That wasn't part of our agreement, Nathan, I reminded him sharply. The contract explicitly states I work independently, without supervision or mandatory reporting. I know, Nathan pressed, his voice placating. It's just, look, it's only for 15 minutes. A quick verbal update. It would go a long way towards smoothing things over politically with Julian and the board members who are breathing down his neck. Against my better judgment, tired of arguing and wanting to focus solely on the technical task at hand, I reluctantly agreed. A mistake. At 4 p.m. sharp, I clicked the link to join the video call. My screen instantly filled not just with Nathan Reed and a visibly tense Julian Croft, but with the entire Apex executive leadership team and, crucially, 2 stern-faced individuals I recognized as influential members of the board of directors. This wasn't a quick status update. It was an ambush. Miriam, Julian began immediately, skipping any pretense of politeness, his voice tight and aggressive. Before we discuss your progress, the board feels we need a comprehensive explanation from you regarding what precisely went wrong with the Odyssey project integration. And more importantly, why these critical failure points and their necessary overrides weren't properly documented under your previous tenure. The intent was glaringly obvious. This wasn't about understanding the problem, it was a blatant attempt to publicly shift the blame for the entire crisis squarely onto my shoulders, painting me as negligent or incompetent in front of the board. My blood ran cold, but my voice remained calm, measured. Good afternoon, Julian, members of the board, I replied, my tone meticulously professional. I am happy to provide a concise status update on the contracted fixes currently in progress, as per Nathan's request. As for analyzing historical documentation gaps or the root causes of the current instability, I continued. Meeting Julian's glare directly through the camera, that would constitute a separate forensic analysis, falling well outside the scope of our current, narrowly defined consulting agreement. Given the critical nature of this failure, Ms. Thorne, interjected Vivian Ross, one of the board members I didn't know personally but recognized by reputation, sharp, demanding, and influential. I think Apex Solutions deserves a full and transparent explanation from the person most familiar with this system's history. I took a slow, deliberate breath, gathering my thoughts, choosing my words carefully. With all due respect, Ms. Ross, I countered, keeping my voice steady. What Apex Solutions may feel it deserves and what our legally binding consulting agreement actually covers are 2 distinct matters. I am currently focused on implementing the necessary technical fixes to stabilize the Odyssey authentication and data linkage systems prior to the critical update deadline, precisely as contracted. If Apex wishes to engage my services for a separate, broader engagement focused on system documentation review, historical analysis, and future risk mitigation strategies. I am certainly open to discussing the terms for such a project after the current crisis is resolved. Julian's face tightened, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his desk off camera. Barely concealed fury radiated from his image. This isn't a negotiation, Miriam, he snapped, losing his composure. You were the senior architect responsible for these core systems for years. If critical processes were left undocumented, if contingency plans were inadequate, that failure ultimately falls on you. Something inside me, held in check for days, finally snapped. The carefully constructed dam of professionalism cracked. Does it, Julian? I shot back, my voice losing its calm, gaining an edge of cold, hard anger. Does it really? Let's review the actual facts, shall we? Facts conveniently omitted from your narrative. Fact 1, for 3 consecutive years, starting when you first proposed the accelerated, under-resourced cloud migration strategy, I submitted formal, documented requests for additional budget and dedicated technical writing resources specifically allocated to properly documenting the complex Odyssey integration processes and legacy workarounds. Each request, I emphasized, looking directly at the board members, was personally denied by Mr. Croft, citing budgetary constraints and the need to prioritize forward-looking initiatives. Fact 2, last year, I personally designed and proposed a comprehensive cross-training program for the development and operations teams, specifically aimed at transferring critical Odyssey knowledge. This program was abruptly cancelled by Mr. Croft 2 weeks before launch. As part of his initiative to streamline operations and reduce non-essential overhead. Fact 3, and perhaps most pertinent to the current crisis, I continued, my voice ringing with conviction, almost exactly 6 months ago. On January 15th of this year, I sent a detailed email explicitly warning about the significant risks posed by these specific undocumented processes, particularly concerning the annual security certificate update in the new cloud environment. That email, detailing the potential for catastrophic authentication and data linkage failures, was sent directly to you, Julian, to Nathan, and to the entire executive leadership distribution list currently present on this call. A stunned silence fell over the virtual meeting room. Faces looked shocked, confused, or suddenly very interested in shuffling papers off camera. I pressed on, my voice steady and clear now, fueled by righteous anger. Furthermore, I spent the majority of my final 2 weeks at Apex Solutions, after being notified of my termination, diligently creating detailed transition documents for my successor, documents outlining key procedures, known issues, and critical dependencies within the Odyssey system. Documents which, based on the current crisis, were apparently either ignored, dismissed, or perhaps never even read. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, scanning the faces on the screen. So, no, Julian, I concluded, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. This catastrophic failure does not fall on me. It falls squarely on a leadership team that systematically ignored repeated warnings, refused necessary resources, and deliberately chose to undervalue, marginalize, and ultimately discard deep institutional knowledge in blind pursuit of fresh perspectives and short-sighted cost-cutting. The 2 board members exchanged significant glances. One of them, James Wheeler, a man known for his meticulous nature, leaned forward towards his camera. Ms. Thorne, he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence, you mentioned a specific email, dated January 15th. Warning about this very issue? Yes, Mr. Wheeler, I confirmed instantly. January 15th, sent to the standard executive distribution list and the primary development team leads. I believe the subject line was quite clear, urgent. Critical documentation gaps and risks regarding Odyssey authentication protocols and annual certificate update. Several people on the call were now visibly, frantically searching through their email archives on their computers. Julian Croft's expression had shifted dramatically from anger to undisguised alarm. His face had gone pale. I will, of course, continue with the contracted repair work, I concluded calmly, regaining my professional composure. You will have a fully functional and stable Odyssey system well before the update deadline, as per our agreement. But let me be unequivocally clear. I will not accept one iota of responsibility for a crisis created solely by management decisions that actively disregarded clear, documented warnings and fundamental principles of responsible system stewardship. Before anyone could respond, before Julian could sputter another accusation or Nathan could attempt damage control, I clicked leave meeting. The connection severed, plunging my office back into silence. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing incessantly. First, a flurry of missed calls and urgent texts from Nathan Reed. Then, a direct call from the board member, James Wheeler. I let that one go to voicemail. Finally, a text message from Walter Finch. Miriam, the text read. The board has called an emergency closed session for tomorrow morning to discuss Julian's leadership and the Odyssey situation. James Wheeler was impressed by your candor. Would you be willing to speak privately and candidly with the board about the state of the Odyssey project and the events leading up to this crisis? Your perspective could be crucial. I stared at the message, the glowing words on the small screen representing an enormous, unexpected weight. The board wasn't just questioning Julian, they were actively considering action against him. And my testimony, my carefully documented evidence, could be the deciding factor, the final nail in his coffin. It was more power, more influence, than I had ever expected or frankly, ever wanted. As if the situation weren't complex enough, a new, purely technical complication emerged later that evening, as I dug deeper into the corrupted Odyssey code. Meticulously untangling the mess Nathan's team had inadvertently made while trying to fix the initial problem before calling me, I discovered the damage was even more extensive than I'd initially assessed. Their panicked, uninformed attempts at quick fixes hadn't just failed, they had actively destabilized several core authentication modules, creating unforeseen dependencies and potential data integrity issues downstream. Correcting this deeper layer of damage would require significant, careful reconstruction of key system components. Not just the targeted fixes I had originally planned. The timeline, already aggressive, suddenly became razor-thin. The global security update was now scheduled in just 4 days. Clients were already receiving automated notifications about the planned security enhancement window. Missing this absolute, immovable deadline would not only be a monumental embarrassment for Apex Solutions, it would create genuine, exploitable security vulnerabilities for their high-profile clients. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. I was faced with another stark choice, one that went beyond personal feelings or contractual obligations. I could meticulously complete only the work explicitly outlined in our narrowly defined agreement, fixing the specific data linkage and initial authentication flaws, leaving Apex and Nathan's team to discover and grapple with the deeper, hidden damage on their own, likely after the update went live, potentially causing even greater chaos. Or, I could go significantly beyond the scope of our agreement, investing more of my own unpaid time and effort to quietly fix the entire system, ensuring it was fully functional, stable, and secure before the deadline. Protecting the clients even if it meant saving Julian's reputation in the short term. As I sat there, staring at the complex lines of corrupted code scrolling across my monitor, one thing became crystal clear. Whatever I decided in the next few hours would determine not just Julian Croft's fate as CEO, but potentially the very future of Apex Solutions itself, a company that, despite its recent betrayal, had been my professional home, my second family, for 20 long years. In the end, the decision wasn't really about Julian, or revenge, or even the money. It was about the work itself. It was about the clients who trusted Apex Systems, implicitly trusting my underlying architecture. It was about the dedicated engineers still working there, like Daniel, whose livelihoods depended on the company's success. And perhaps, most fundamentally, it was about my own deeply ingrained professional integrity. I decided to fix the entire system, not for Julian, not even for Apex Solutions as it currently stood, but because it was the right thing to do. Because the system deserved to be stable. Because I couldn't walk away leaving a ticking time bomb behind. Regardless of who had set the fuse, working nearly 48 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and sheer determination. I meticulously rebuilt the damaged authentication modules from the ground up, re-implemented robust data linkage protocols, and even added enhanced logging and a more resilient update mechanism designed to prevent similar cascade failures in the future. I documented everything, embedding clear comments in the code and updating the internal technical notes, work that went far beyond the scope of my contract. Work they hadn't paid for and likely would never appreciate. On the morning of the third day, with the comprehensive system repairs finally complete and Odyssey running smoothly in the staging environment, confirmed by a relieved but cautious email from Nathan, I received one final, unexpected call from Julian Croft himself. His tone was completely different now, carefully modulated, stripped of all arrogance, almost pleading. "Miriam, we need to talk," he began, his voice subdued. "The board, they've called a formal confidence vote for tomorrow morning. Before they make their decision," he continued, rushing the words out, I wanted to personally offer you your position back. Senior Vice President of Infrastructure Strategy. A substantial raise, of course. A guaranteed seat on the executive leadership team." The raw desperation in his voice was unmistakable, pathetic. This wasn't a genuine apology. It wasn't a belated recognition of my true value. It was a transparent, last-ditch attempt to save his own skin, to use my potential return as leverage with the board. "Thank you for the offer, Julian," I replied calmly, my voice devoid of emotion. "But as I believe I mentioned, I have already accepted a position elsewhere. At Summit Solutions. Whatever they're offering, Miriam, I'll double it," he pressed instantly, the panic escalating in his voice. "Triple it. Name your number." We've worked together for years, Miriam, despite recent misunderstandings. Don't let one mistake destroy that entire relationship. One misunderstanding, Julian? I repeated, the ice in my voice finally cracking through. "You fired me. Via a cold, impersonal video call. After 20 years of dedicated service. You called me replaceable and outdated. You ordered me out of the building like a trespasser. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Julian. That was a deliberate choice. Your choice. I made a mistake," he conceded, his voice barely a whisper now, thick with desperation. "A terrible mistake. I underestimated your contribution, your importance to Odyssey, to Apex. Profoundly. But we can fix this, Miriam. Please. A fresh start. For both of us. For the company. I'm not interested in a fresh start with Apex Solutions under your leadership, Julian," I stated firmly, unequivocally. "My work here is done. I have successfully completed the contracted fixes for the Odyssey project. The system is stable, secure, and fully prepared for the update. I have also prepared comprehensive documentation detailing the exact repairs implemented and the recommended procedures for future updates, which I will securely transmit to Nathan later today upon receipt of final confirmation of payment." There was a long pause on the line. Is there truly nothing I can say or do to change your mind, Miriam?" he asked finally, his voice sounding utterly defeated. "Yes, Julian," I replied, my voice softening slightly, not out of pity, but out of a need for closure. "There is something you could have said. You could have said, 'Thank you, Miriam. Thank you for the 20 years you dedicated to helping build this company. Thank you for the countless nights and weekends you sacrificed away from your family. Thank you for the critical innovations you contributed that were never officially recognized or rewarded.' You could acknowledge, genuinely, that deep experience and institutional knowledge have value, perhaps even more value, alongside the fresh perspectives you prize so highly." The line went utterly silent for several long seconds. I could hear his faint, ragged breathing. "Thank you, Miriam," Julian finally said, his voice quiet, subdued, almost unrecognizable. "Thank you for everything you did for Apex." It wasn't everything I'd wanted him to say, but it was something. An admission, however late, however forced. "You're welcome, Julian," I replied simply. "The board's emergency meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow, correct?" "Yes," he confirmed, his voice barely audible. Will you be speaking to them? Yes, Julian, I will, I confirmed, my resolve hardening once more. Mr. Finch formally invited me, and I have accepted. I will be telling them exactly what happened. All of it. Not to punish you, necessarily, I added, clarifying my own motives as much as informing him, but because they deserve to know the truth about how their company is being managed, about the risks they were unknowingly subjected to, and about the value they almost threw away. I ended the call, the quiet click echoing in the room. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had just sealed Julian Croft's fate as CEO of Apex Solutions. 2 weeks later, I walked into the sleek, modern offices of Summit Solutions, located in a bright, airy building overlooking the Cedar Ridge riverfront. My new office was spacious, filled with natural light, and my team was a vibrant mix of seasoned veterans like myself and sharp, younger innovators, all of whom seemed genuinely eager to collaborate and learn from each other. The atmosphere was charged with positive energy, a stark contrast to the climate of fear and resentment that had permeated Apex under Julian. My first major project, assigned by the supportive VP I'd instantly connected with, was ironically perfect. Designing and implementing a comprehensive, company-wide knowledge transfer and retention system, a strategic solution to the very institutional vulnerability, the undervaluing of deep experience, that had led directly to Apex Solutions' near-catastrophic crisis. As for Apex, the aftermath of my candid testimony to the board, supported by meticulous documentation and corroborating statements from Mr. Finch, was swift and decisive. Julian Croft was removed as CEO effective immediately. Walter Finch agreed to step back in as interim CEO, tasked with stabilizing the company and finding a suitable permanent replacement who valued both innovation and experience. The Odyssey project update, thanks to my extensive repairs and detailed documentation, proceeded flawlessly, without a single hitch, earning relieved praise from clients unaware of how close they had come to disaster. On my third day at Summit Solutions, I received a call from Nathan Reed. His voice sounded lighter, less burdened. "Thought you'd want to know, Miriam," he said, a note of respect in his tone that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Finch is implementing a complete overhaul of our internal knowledge management systems, top to bottom. He's also instituted a strict new company policy," Nathan continued. "Mandatory, comprehensive knowledge transfer protocols and a minimum 30-day paid transition period for all departing senior employees, regardless of the circumstances of their separation." "Good to hear, Nathan," I replied sincerely. "That sounds like a positive step. It should help prevent future crises." He's actually calling it the Thorn Protocol," Nathan added, a hint of awkwardness in his voice. "Named after you." I smiled at that, a genuine, unforced smile. It wasn't vindication, exactly, but it was a small, meaningful acknowledgement. A quiet validation of my legacy at the company I had served for so long. 3 months later, a formal, embossed invitation arrived in my mail, Apex Solutions' 25th anniversary gala. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on personal stationery from Walter Finch. "Miriam," it read, "I sincerely hope you will join us to celebrate Apex's history, a history you were instrumental in creating. The board and I would be honored by your presence. Our newly appointed CEO is also very keen to meet the person whose institutional knowledge both challenged and ultimately strengthened this company immeasurably." After a moment's consideration, I decided to attend, not out of any lingering bitterness or desire to gloat over Julian's downfall, not even out of curiosity about the new leadership, but simply to honor the 2 decades of my own life, the dedication and expertise I had poured into helping build something valuable. To close that chapter properly. The ultimate revenge, I realized as I RSVP'd, wasn't bringing Julian Croft down or watching Apex struggle without me. It was this: thriving, building a successful, fulfilling career in a workplace that actively valued my contributions, my experience, my perspective. Helping to build a culture, both at Summit and perhaps, through the ripples of the Thorn Protocol, even back at Apex, where experience and innovation could work in true harmony, rather than in opposition. As I settled deeper into my rewarding new role at Summit Solutions, collaborating with bright minds on challenging projects. I felt no lingering regret for having fixed the Odyssey system before I left Apex for good. My professional integrity had never been about retribution, about what I could destroy. It had always been about what I could build, what I could stabilize, what I could improve, a fundamental lesson Julian Croft had learned far too late, at far too great a cost. The curt video call dismissal that had felt so devastating on that misty Saturday morning hadn't been an ending after all. It had, in fact, been an unexpected, liberating gift. It had pushed me out of a company that no longer saw my worth and propelled me toward one that did. At 59, I wasn't replaceable. I wasn't outdated. I was experienced, knowledgeable, resilient, and, as it turned out, more valuable than ever. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't found in tearing others down. It's found in rising higher, stronger, and more authentically yourself than they ever thought possible.